And what's happened in America, we all know. The statistics on the amount of Americans paying with plastic tell the story. These are from 2020. I'm sure after the pandemic and our change in lifestyle, they're even greater. The number of 2020 transactions involving debit cards, 86 billion. The amount involving credit cards, 41 billion. Between the two, credit and debit cards, in 2020, 127 billion transactions in America. Well, how are we doing with cash transactions? 32.8 billion. How about the use of a check? 5 billion. So we're becoming a nation that clearly, maybe even a world, that pays with plastic. And today we're going to ask a few questions about how those payments are made and the charges that are imposed. This committee held a hearing with witnesses from Visa and MasterCard 16 years ago to discuss anti-competitive fees. We're back. Here's what I've learned. Visa and MasterCard control about 80% of the credit and debit card market. They've established a system of fees and rules that apply to every transaction of the billions I just mentioned, involving cards used by thousands of banks. Each time a credit or debit card is used, Visa and MasterCard charge fees that take a cut out of the transaction.
Okay. That's what we're talking about today. Anyone who owns a small business who utilizes credit cards or debit cards, allows you to purchase via those, actually has to pay for the privilege of allowing or accepting credit cards. It ranges. It used to be a small, tiny percentage. It is now up to as much as 5% in some cases. And I found out from more than one business owner that all of these cash back and perks that these various cards offer, the small business is who pays for that. I had no idea.
No.
I had no clue. This should be an enlightening hearing. Look, I don't think there's anyone out there that's watching this that is a huge fan of Visa and MasterCard and all the fees and stuff associated with it. Unfortunately, they're a part of life these days. I mean, everything is debit or credit. Everything. There are even some places that have had to be taken to court because they don't take cash. I don't know if you saw that. There was a story in, I believe, Colorado, where a company refused to accept cash, and they actually had to change Colorado law to require it. And unfortunately, there's very little to no enforcement, though, because they don't know how to enforce it. These are just some of the many, many issues that we're facing these days. But so Shawn was kind enough to watch the hearing, and as he is wont to do, give us the timestamps for the most interesting and important aspects of said hearing.
Yep.
So the first little clip that we have is actually from the very beginning, and it is our good personal friend, Dick Durbin. He's been to my house countless times for barbecue. No, I'm kidding. I've never even met the guy in person. But I like to say that because those who know me will find that incredibly amusing, because douche. He's also the chair of this committee, so we kind of got to listen to what he has to say. But in this case, at least, it seems like he kind of makes sense.
Yeah,
he says some stuff that, makes a lot of sense, put it that way. All right, let's get into it. Here we go.
Of the credit cards and banks in terms of what those fees would be. There was no competition because we have a duopoly here, well represented at this table.
True.
And that created a situation where the market forces really don't work. They're not supposed to work. They're not designed to work. And what's happened in America, we all know. The statistics on the amount of Americans paying with plastic tell the story. These are from 2020.
Yeah, and we know it's gone up since then, right? I mean, let's face it, Amazon record profits. Many online only retailers, that's the only way to pay. You, at best, you've got PayPal, right? But that is treated as a credit payment.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm sure after the pandemic and our change in lifestyle, they're even greater.
Yeah.
The number of 2020 transactions involving debit cards, 86 billion.
86
The amount involving
billion transactions, dude.
In a year.
Like, think about that number. Like, we only have like 250 million Americans, right?
Yeah.
330.
It's had 330.
I think it's 330. I don't know where I got 250. 330 million Americans. 80 billion transactions.
Uh-huh.
That's a lot of transactions, man. Slow down. You're going to melt your plastic, Jolene. Stop it.
credit cards, 41 billion. Between the two, credit and debit cards in 2020, 127 billion transactions in America.
127 billion transactions.
Uh-huh. That's a lot.
That is a mind-boggling number if you think about it.
That's a lot of transactions.
Well, how are we doing with cash transactions? 32.8 billion. How about the use of a check?
Which I will say is still a surprisingly high number
Yeah.
given, 2020 and all the stuff that happened then. That's a surprisingly high number. But if you think about 32 billion transactions with cash, that includes your gas station stops and your, I'll just pay with a couple bucks kind of thing.
5 billion.
With checks.
So we're becoming a nation that clearly, maybe even a world, that pays with plastic. And today we're going to ask a few questions about how those payments are made and the charges that are imposed. This committee held a hearing with witnesses from Visa and MasterCard 16 years ago to discuss anti-competitive fees. We're back. Here's what I've learned. Visa and MasterCard control about 80% of the credit and debit card market. They've established a system of fees and rules that apply to every transaction of the billions I just mentioned, involving cards used by thousands of banks. Each time a credit or debit card is used, Visa and MasterCard charge fees that take a cut out of the transaction.
Yep.
You don't see it on the check at the restaurant.
Nope.
It's there.
It's there.
Some of that cut they keep for themselves. Most of it's given to the bank that issued the card.
Yep.
The fee that Visa and MasterCard require the merchant to pay to the card issuing bank is called an interchange fee. It's usually charged as a percentage of the transaction plus a flat fee.
Yep.
For example, 2% plus 10 cents per transaction. That means when a card transaction of $100 is made, the merchant gets less than $98 after the fees are deducted.
Yep.
And merchants end up raising the prices of their products to make up for the deducted fees.
Because they have to.
Yeah.
Because that product costs them money. Look, I will be the first to join the march against large corporations like Amazon, Walmart, these other POSs, right? But your mom and pop shops, unfortunately, don't have a choice. They have to raise their prices to compensate for what credit card places charge them. That's why in many cases you can actually get a cash discount with mom and pop shops. If you ask, don't be afraid to ask, hey, is there a cash discount? My grandpa used to ask that all the time, dude. We'd go to Sears. Is there a cash discount? Anywhere. Is there a cash discount? Grandpa, stop it.
You might ask, how much have Americans been charged in interchange fees by Visa and MasterCard since that hearing 16 years ago in 2006? According to payments consultant CMSPI, it's $794 billion.
Yeah.
Holy hell. 794 billion with a B dollars in 16 years.
Yeah.
$750 billion.
Taken out of our economy.
Yeah. Being shuffled from the place you bought whatever from to the credit card companies. Visa and MasterCard, evil people.
All built into the prices retailers have to charge and consumers have to pay. Interchange fees are designed to avoid competitive market pressures. Banks get the fees, but banks do not set the fees. Instead, the banks let Visa and MasterCard set the fees on their behalf.
Yep.
So the same schedule of fee rates applies for all banks in the network. This means that all banks in the network are guaranteed the same interchange fee, regardless of how efficient or inefficient the bank is in running a card operation or preventing fraud. It's a gravy train.
Yeah.
When Visa and MasterCard raise interchange fees, banks want to issue more cards because they make more on each swipe.
Yep.
And Visa and MasterCard profit when there are more swipes because they take their own cut, called a network fee, from the merchant on each swipe.
Yeah.
But merchants and their customers take it on the chin, and we're going to hear that firsthand today. What can merchants do to try to keep the fee rates down? Not much.
Not much.
Visa and MasterCard are the negotiating agents for thousands of banks.
Mhm.
If a merchant wants to be able to accept payment from those banks' customers, they have to agree to Visa and MasterCard's fees and terms.
Yep.
I remember at that hearing 16 years ago, at that table, one of the customers, or one of the retailers, had a stack about 3 inches tall. They had asked for a copy of the contractual agreement with Visa and MasterCard when it came to imposing fees.
Yeah.
They quickly said, this isn't the complete contract. They would only give us part of it,
Uh-huh.
3 or 4 inches tall. And you expect a grocery store, a restaurant to go through all this? Bottom line,
Yeah, and that's part of the problem. We talked about that in another episode.
Yep,
the
we
terms of
did.
service and the in-user license agreement that you have to agree to in order to use said product. Yeah, it's gotten out of control, completely out of control. And mom and pop shops are the ones that are footing the bill. Ultimately, the consumer, you and me, are the ones that have to pay for the almost $1 trillion that is being shuffled into Visa and MasterCard's pockets.
when fees go up, it costs more to use money.
Mm-hmm.
And that cost gets billed into prices consumers pay. Visa and MasterCard raised their swipe fees 2 weeks ago, despite bipartisan opposition from Congress. It was obvious. We're suffering from inflation. Don't raise these hidden fees again.
Now, one thing that's interesting is this is actually from 2023, right?
2022.
2022. So this is when the majority of the Democrat Party was insisting we weren't experiencing inflation.
Yeah.
It's all a lie. You know, they finally admitted it. But I find it interesting that Mr. Durbin was so quick to say, yeah, inflation's real at this point in time. It's interesting.
We did it anyway. Senator Marshall and I, Representatives Welsh and Van Dyne, urged them not to do it. They didn't listen, and we'll talk about it today.
Mm-hmm.
The credit and debit card systems are not competitive marketplaces. When you don't have real competition, what happens? You get higher costs, less innovation, weaker security.
Yep.
And new potential competitors get stifled. It's a sweetheart deal for the dominant networks, for the biggest banks, and for certain card holders who have ritzy rewards programs.
Yep.
But the average small business and the consumer, they pay the price.
Yes.
Other countries have figured this out, incidentally. You can't have a fair system when you let networks fix the swipe fees without competition or regulation.
Yeah.
So the European Union, Australia, China, India, Israel, South Korea, and more have stepped up to create reasonable swipe fee limits.
Now, I will say this. We, here in America, right, we like to believe that we're superior in every way to other countries. Now, as far as freedom goes, especially freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, things like that, we are absolutely superior. Back-to-back World War champs, bring it. But there are aspects that I believe other countries have nailed a little bit better than us. One of those things is consumer protection and the banning of toxic chemicals that shouldn't be in foods.
True.
I mean, there are aspects, like I said, where I think we're kind of lagging behind a little bit. And I think that's one of them. Our regulatory agencies are not doing their jobs. Just leave it there.
We have the Durbin Amendment that applies only to debit cards. In 2010, I wrote that law that placed reasonable limits on debit interchange fees that Visa and MasterCard fixed on behalf of big banks. It has generated a lot of talk over the last few years and a lot of TV commercials. And boy, the big banks hate the Durbin Amendment like the devil hates holy water. In the absence of competitive marketplace, there needs to be some limit on Visa and MasterCard's fee fixing. Here's a few steps I'd like to suggest. Let's have transparency and make it clear to consumers in their monthly statements how much of their card purchases are being deducted as interchange fees.
I think that's reasonable.
It is.
Because one thing we have to do in this country is we have to walk a fine line between consumerism, capitalism, marketplace-driven solutions versus legislating everything, right? And that's one area that I believe we excel at is more of an open capitalistic society, but there are definitely problems. So that it's an interesting concept, and I don't hate it. Like, present it front and center. Hey, last month on your statement, $82 worth of your purchases was just going to us. Like, I don't hate that.
You know you have the information, and you know you can provide it.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe if consumers knew how much of their cards were costing their favorite restaurants and retailers, they'd use less costly cards. Second, let's stop the practice of charging swipe fees on the part of the transaction amount that is sales tax.
Yes.
That's a swipe tax on top of a sales tax.
Yes.
Give the consumers a break.
Right.
Let's stop the exclusivity deals where Visa and MasterCard tell banks they can't use any other network on their cards.
Mm-hmm.
Let's give merchants a choice of card network options on each swipe and each online sale. Let's make sure that someone besides the dominant network plays a role in setting security standards for cards. Security innovators and startups are being shut out of the current system. And let's reduce inflationary pressure by preventing network fixed swipe fees from being jacked up to unreasonable levels. We got a lot to talk about today. We're joined by a distinguished panel. I thank them for joining this spirited discussion. And let me turn to Senator Grassley.
Okay. It really, really annoys me when you do this, but you've presented a statement from somebody that I think is a dipshit that I happen to agree with. You suck. I'm just no. Shawn does a really good job of giving the entire picture. Durbin said a lot of things that I think are accurate.
Sometimes he really does care about the.
Sometimes he does his job.
American people. Yeah.
Sometimes he actually does his job. So in this case, I would love to pick apart things that, he said that are wrong or I disagree with, but he made some really good points.
He did on this one.
And we as consumers, let's face it, especially when it's percentage based, everything is so high now. We were just talking before the show, they're raising the rates of StreamYard, which is the service that I use to be able to talk to you guys. Everything's going up.
Yeah.
Everything's going up. The last thing we need is to be sending more and more money to Visa and MasterCard. They have enough. So, good. All right. Yeah. Good. Begrudgingly give it to Durbin. No, he did bring up some good points. Next is Senator Grassley from Iowa. Republican from Iowa. He is the ranking member.
Yep.
But what is that? So real quick.
Okay.
You got the chair. That's the guy in charge, right? What's the ranking member? That's the highest person of the other party, right?
Okay. Whatever party is in the majority. Gets to be the chair of the committees.
Okay.
And they set the times and then they set what the hearing is going to be about.
So because the Democrats control the Senate, all the ranking members on the committees are Democrats.
Or Republican. Because he's the chair. They get the chairmanship.
That's what the chair. Yeah, I said ranking member.
And then the Senate majority leader is the one who gets to decide who gets to be the chair.
Okay, so the Senate majority leader chooses the chair and then appoints them.
Yep.
And that's whichever party has the majority in that particular
Yes.
like the Senate, for example.
And then the ranking member, if
Yep.
Republicans had the majority in the Senate,
Mhm.
he would be the chair of the committee.
Okay, so it's whoever would actually be the chair if the other party controlled it.
Yeah.
It's basically the head person from the other party.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, he's the number one person for the opposing party.
Right. Okay. All right. I thought that's what it was, but here we go.
First of all, Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you for working with us on this side of the aisle to make sure that the interests of all stakeholders are taken into consideration. And I particularly want to thank you for including financial institutions in the panel. Interstate and swipe fees is the amount of money that merchants pay for accepting a debit or credit card. These fees vary depending on many factors, but in general end up being between 1% to 3% of purchases. And I just learned, including sales tax, a great focus has been paid to these fees as more and more consumers use credit and debit cards to make their purchases. As many of my colleagues know, this is an issue that has passionate voices on both sides. Many Iowa businesses have complained that it seems that these fees are high for accepting credit and debit cards for
They are.
purchases.
They are.
These businesses want to give their customers the option to pay using different methods,
Yep.
but that can be difficult if fees are eating into already tight margins,
Yep.
especially for small business owners. These
Right.
they may have to then pass along these costs to the consumer.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there are a number of benefits to card usage for both consumers and businesses,
They are convenient
including
as hell.
convenience,
Yeah.
security, and increased purchasing power. Consumers may spend more money on cards than if they use cash. Consumers may also benefit through rewards or cash back on their cards. There's a balancing act here that we need to acknowledge, and that any future action should be carefully considered for possible impact. I look forward to hearing from all of you on this subject.
Okay. And he makes a good point. Let's face it, cards are more convenient because how else are you going to buy stuff from Amazon? You're going to go, I mean, that's just the way that it is. I detest Amazon, but let's face it, it's a digital society. Debit cards, credit cards, they're pretty much a necessity now. So they are convenient, and the prepaids are kind of nice because security, right? You can put X number of dollars on a prepaid card and then shop without having to worry about somebody stealing your banking information. My mother-in-law was very, very reluctant to do any online shopping because she was afraid of someone taking her banking information, which is a very valid concern these days. Prepaid cards, Visa, MasterCard, help with that. Let's face it, there are some convenience factors there. Grr. Our next clip is, let's see here, the intro and swearing in of witnesses, which is 11:56 to 15:32.
Thanks, Senator Grasso. We have six witnesses. Thank them for joining us. I'm going to
Thank you.
give a short introduction to each before they're recognized.
Okay.
First witness is Laura Shapira Carrette. She's chair and CEO of Giant Eagle, a supermarket chain headquartered in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
470 locations throughout Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, and Indiana. She served as CEO of Giant Eagle since 2012. Previously served as the Senior Executive Vice President, Chief Strategy Officer, and Senior Vice President of Marketing. She's worked for...
Have you heard of Giant Eagle before?
I
this?
haven't. I
They're
heard
supposed to
that
be in
too when
Indiana, but I don't see any.
I heard that too. I would never heard of it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it. Doesn't mean much because
We're from
Shop
northern
local.
Indiana. Maybe it's in southern.
It could be.
Giant Eagle since the year 2000, has a bachelor's degree from Amherst. Glad to have you here. Second witness, Bill Sheedy, senior advisor to Visa's chair and CEO, position he's held since 2020. He's responsible for strategic initiatives. Previously served as Visa's president of Europe, North America, and Latin America, and he helped lead the company's restructuring in 2007 and its IPO in 2008. Undergraduate degree from West Virginia University and an MBA from Notre Dame. Thank you for being here. Next witness is Linda Kirkpatrick, president of North American for MasterCard. She's responsible for overseeing MasterCard's operations and customer-facing activities in the U.S. and Canada. She's been with MasterCard since 1997, and she previously served in a leadership role involving investor relations, U.S. strategy and communication, U.S. issuers, global rules and standards, compliance programs, and dispute resolution management. She has a degree from Manhattanville College. Thank you for joining us. Next witness is Ed Mierzwinski. Close, Ed? Did I get it right? That's because I represent Chicago. He's the senior director of the Federal Consumer Program.
You better know those Polish names in Chicago, man. Northwest Indiana, too. We have a huge Polish population in Northwest Indiana. That's why they have like the
Dingus Day?
Dingus Day, Pierogi Fest, like the things that I can't think of, punchkis. They're like, do you know what those are?
I don't.
They're almost like filled donuts, but they get mad if you call them donuts. They're a pastry.
Okay.
Think of it like a jelly donut, right? It looks very similar to a jelly donut, but it's a different type of dough, and they have different fillings from apricot to strawberry, raspberry, like all kinds of different. Anyway, huge Polish / Western Eastern European population in this area. So, yeah, you better be able to know the names.
Program at the U.S. Public Interest Research Group, known as PIRG. Mr. Mierzwinski has worked for U.S. PIRG since 1989, oversees the Federal Consumer Program, helps to lead national efforts to improve consumer credit reporting laws, identity theft protection, product safety regulation, and more. Co-founder of the Americans for Financial Reform, received his undergraduate degree and master's degrees from the University of Connecticut. Senator Blumenthal, take notice. Our next witness is Charles Kim,
What the hell's that supposed to mean?
Executive Vice
That's what I was
President, Chief
wondering.
Financial Officer of
I heard that too.
Yeah, what is that supposed to mean?
I'm not sure if that was what kind of dig that was at Blumenthal.
Yeah, is that a dig or was that a
Inside
like
joke?
he's from your neck of the woods? Where's
That could be.
Blumenthal from?
Blumenthal is the senator from Connecticut.
So maybe it was maybe
Commerce Bank Shares, responsible for all financial functions of the company, as well as for the company's strategic planning, marketing, technology, enterprise operations, and consumer card business. He's been with Commerce Bank. He received his undergraduate and MBA degrees from Washington University in St. Louis, the Hilltop. Final witness is Doug Cantor. Since 2021, Mr. Cantor has served as general counsel for the National Association of Convenience Stores.
Oh, okay.
Previously practiced law at Steptoe and Johnson, where he was general counsel to the Merchant Payments Coalition, among other organizations. In his career, he worked as deputy chief of staff at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and as a public school teacher.
Yeah.
Received his BA from the University of Virginia, his JD from Yale Law School. Again,
Okay.
thanks to all of the witnesses for being here.
So he had a little basically community college degree, but graduated from Yale for his law degree. Interesting. I wonder if it was paid scholarship, because I find these things interesting, especially when someone like has a relatively inexpensive school as a foundation and then go on to graduate from one of these Ivy League schools. I find that interesting.
Now, it is customary in this committee for us to ask you to take an oath to tell the truth. So if you'd all please stand and raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative, which now gives them permission to proceed.
Okay, so they're all sworn in. They have all sworn to tell the truth. Our first, I guess, witness is the CEO of Giant Eagle, Laura Carrett, something like that.
I don't know how to.
And we're going to start with Ms. Corrett.
Correct. There we go.
Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the committee. I'm Laura Carrett, CEO, President, and Executive Chair of Giant Eagle, one of the nation's largest multi-format food, fuel, and convenience retailers,
Okay.
with approximately 34,000 team members, operating more than 470 corporate and independently owned and operated store locations throughout 5 Midwest states, including Pennsylvania and Ohio. On April 22nd of this year, with no negotiation or threat of competition constraining them, Visa and MasterCard imposed a fee increase that will cost Giant Eagle $1.3 million annually.
Ooh.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about the impact of swipe fees on our business.
Yeah, that's a major.
That's a major, and that's on top of what they were already paying. But it's not. This is not the entirety. This is the raise, the fee raise. Now is going to cost us an additional $1.3 million a year.
And consumers are going to have to pay for
Yeah, we're going to have to foot the bill for that because no store can sell things for less than what they paid for it and stay in business.
I'm also proud to serve as Vice Chair of FMI, the Food Industry Association. FMI works with and on behalf of the entire food industry to advance a safer, healthier, and more efficient consumer food supply chain.
How does FMI translate to Food Safety Administration?
I'm not sure.
You see what I'm saying, though, right?
I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay.
FMI's membership includes nearly 1,000 supermarket member companies that collectively operate almost 33,000 food retail outlets and employ approximately 6 million workers. Our industry historically operates on razor-thin margins of 1% to 2%.
Yes.
We operate in a highly competitive market, and as inflation has driven prices higher, our customers have become even more conscious of how they are spending their money, driving down profits.
Oh, yeah.
There are 3 points I'd like to make today.
Okay.
First, Giant Eagle's swipe fees have materially increased over time.
Pause it. You got
Okay.
something?
You want to say the FMI stands for Food Marketing Institute.
Okay. So, it's less about safety and more about marketing, it sounds to me. Maybe they do focus on safety, but it's certainly an interesting name.
It is an interesting.
Yeah. FMI, Food Marketing Institute. Okay. Good to know. Thank you, Shawn.
You're welcome.
And the April 22nd unilateral increase will only exacerbate this problem. Visa and MasterCard together control 85% of the market. On April 22nd of this year, both Visa and MasterCard increased the fees retailers pay, and they also created new categories of fees. Every bank that issues credit and debit cards adopted these fee increases without deviation or exception. In my estimation, this cannot possibly comply with either the letter or the spirit of our nation's antitrust laws.
Thank you.
This latest price increase fits the pattern we've seen for years. Giant Eagle's been paying higher and higher payment fee costs. Electronic tender sales make up about 82% of our sales transactions for our company. Of the 82% that are electronic tender, about 37% of the total sales are Visa and MasterCard. But when you look at the total card processing fees, Visa and MasterCard make up over 62% of those fees.
Wow. Think about that for a minute. Only 30%.
She said 34%.
34% of the digital sales, basically, credit or debit, swipe at the machine, are Visa, MasterCard, but they represent over 60% of the fees. Wow.
Over the past 4 years, our Visa and MasterCard fees have grown from 57% of our total fees to 62% of our total fees, while at the same time, Visa and MasterCard sales as a percentage of total sales have declined by almost 2%. In stark contrast, during the pandemic, my company and others like it were authorized by the USDA to accept online payments from our customers using the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, SNAP, EBT cards. It's interesting to note
Food stamps.
that those SNAP electronic transactions are completed securely, without Visa or MasterCard, and without incurring any swipe fees. It's hard for us to understand why SNAP EBT cards could accommodate the changes necessitated by the pandemic, but Visa and MasterCard used it as an avenue to raise prices.
I mean, is anybody else surprised? I'm not
No.
surprised, not even a little.
Second, millions of customers suffer when swipe fees increase.
Yes.
Because of the unilateral fee increases, Visa and MasterCard that they announced on April 22nd, my company and my customers will be paying an additional $1.3 million in swipe fees. This fee increase came on the heels of Visa reporting in its March 22nd, 2022 quarterly financials that its profit margin was just above 50%. Third,
50% profit margin, dude. Like, what company would love to have a 50% profit margin, man? Most companies, especially retailers like grocery stores and other stores, are about a 1 to 2% profit margin.
Yeah.
That's why this is such a big deal for places.
there must be competition in the debit and credit card markets.
Yes.
Visa and MasterCards are the only vendors that Giant Eagle cannot negotiate with. When Giant Eagle buys ketchup or paper towels, its suppliers compete to give Giant Eagle the best price. Ultimately, our customers benefit from a competitive market. In contrast, Visa and MasterCard do not compete for merchant business. The fees associated with accepting any type of payment for a particular good should be incidental to the transaction and certainly should not be among our highest expenses. This expense, swipe fees, is third only to labor and rent that we face. I applaud.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let that sink in for just a moment. Swipe fees represent the third largest percentage that they're having to pay out. So when you run a company, right, you have your overhead. Your overhead is your rent, your lights, your other utilities, your labor. Yeah. Labor generally represents a large portion of, I mean, let's face it, right? It's expensive to employ people to do work. So you got your overhead or your rent, whatever, then your labor cost, then swipe fees. What?
Yeah, you would never guess.
Of all the things that companies have to deal with, swipe fees should not be number 3 biggest expense.
This committee for looking at ways to achieve robust competition in the use of credit and debit cards, similar to the robust competition we must take part in every day. I would be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Corrett.
Okay, so
Should go right into the nuts.
Yeah. With the next one is going to be the guy from Visa, Bill Sheedy. At first, I thought his name was Shady. I was like, that's perfect, but no, it's Sheedy. Look, I'm sure he's a decent guy, but like not exactly the most popular person in the room right now. So,
Mr. Sheedy.
And that's going to go from 2035 to 2517. Let's hear what the great gentleman who represents Visa has to say.
Of Visa.
Good morning.
Make sure that button.
Sorry.
Good.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
He looks like a very intense man, doesn't he?
Mhm.
Look at those eyes and just that look on his. I mean, he might be a jovial guy. I don't know, but looking at him in this regard, look at that. He looks like a very, very intense man. Imagine him as your dad, man. Like, I'd be terrified to speak.
More than 60 years, Visa has enabled people, businesses, and governments to make and receive payments through its secure transaction processing network. I am pleased to be able to share with the committee the many ways in which Visa works to promote safety, security, innovation, and competition to drive economic growth and financial inclusion.
Bullshit. Competition. Come on, my guy. Like, I can understand the focus on the other stuff that he was talking about. I get it. but no one is going to buy the bullshit line that Visa fosters competition. Come on.
Recently, we have taken a number of important steps to support the economy and to maintain the security, reliability, and stability of our network.
Support the economy.
These steps are intended to help businesses of all sizes, including those that may be struggling due to the effects of the pandemic and consumers across the country. At the outset of the pandemic, we lowered interchange rates for certain key segments, including grocery stores, restaurants, and education. In April, we lowered
I don't
interchange
either.
rates for the majority of U.S. businesses.
I don't remember
Visa is
that.
also taking steps to make online payments more secure by encouraging the use of secure digital tokens so that transactions can be processed without sharing a cardholder's sensitive account information and
Secure digital tokens. That sounds a lot like
The digital
Bitcoin.
currency.
Yeah, like digital currency. I mean, maybe it's something else, but I don't know.
implementing changes designed to promote accurate transaction processing. As a payments network, Visa takes its role in setting interchange rates very seriously, with the goal of fostering balance, security, and stability while growing the overall payments ecosystem. It is important to note that Visa does not earn revenue from interchange fees. Our brand promise has always been rooted in being the best way to
Yeah.
pay and be paid.
Hold on. I want to make sure I understand this. So his claim
Yeah.
is that Visa does not earn revenue through interchange fees.
That's what they claim.
So where does this money go then?
They say that it goes to protect their network when we use the card, but I don't know. I don't want to call him a liar.
Yeah, let's let him talk, because
Okay.
I mean, obviously we got some stuff to go through, and there's going to be some questions asked. So let's have the senators have the opportunity to ask the questions. Here we go.
We remain steadfast in our focus to deliver on this commitment. Our success is based heavily on investing in and continuously enhancing the security of our network, more so than any other part of our business. Trust and security are the foundation of
That's what
everything
you
we
get.
do. In the last 5 years, we have spent over $9 billion on fraud protection and security. In 2020,
Okay, look, I'm just going to say this. You say that like that's a lot of money, and $9 billion is a lot of money until we're talking about you guys getting $700 billion over the last 16 years.
Where did the other 691 billion go?
Right. Good. Yeah. GFY, man. You know, like, bruh.
2021 alone, our fraud prevention programs helped merchants and financial institutions prevent nearly $26 billion in fraud. Cardholders choosing Visa can count on our zero liability protections on unauthorized transactions. Visa stands behind every transaction with programs such as zero liability and efficient dispute resolution. Merchants who choose to accept Visa are guaranteed payment when a transaction is properly authorized on our network. Competitive pressures on Visa to maintain and improve upon its reliability, innovation, and security have never been more pressing. New competitors, new ways of paying, advances in security, as well as cyber risks are emerging at a dizzying pace. As consumers and merchants pay digitally more often, getting into payments has become as easy as developing and marketing an attractive app. The growing number of payment options now available at checkout, especially online, is a reflection of this competitive environment and the continued expansion of consumer and merchant choice in payments. In addition to cash, checks, and traditional U.S. payment networks, we also compete today with digital wallets, buy now, pay later solutions, fintech and big tech, real-time payment systems, and cryptocurrencies. With this massively changing competitive environment, Visa is even more clear about our first order priority. Our success depends on our ability to deliver innovative, safer, more secure payments and a strong value proposition to consumers and merchants alike. Payments will continue to evolve through new payment uses, new business models, new frictionless commerce. However, regulatory interventions focusing exclusively on card networks could shift consumer spending away from networks like Visa into more expensive payment methods with more risk, less reliability, and fewer protections and security. Visa is proud of our security and fraud fighting tools. Another truly important benefit of our network is that we level the playing field between large and small players. The investments that we've made have enabled small retailers and community banks and credit unions to compete with larger merchants and larger banks to deliver robust capabilities, positive customer experiences, and security protections. This has created a vibrant, competitive environment that allows American and global economy to thrive and grow. We appreciate the opportunity to address the committee on these important issues, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Do you know what I didn't hear? I listened to everything they said. I didn't hear a single even pretend like they're going to reduce fees or any of that, right? What he said was, oh, regulatory intervention focused on us is going to be bad. And you're paying for our security, the security of Visa. That's what it's all about to them. We're nice and secure and we offer this and that. So you should be more than happy. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like a protection racket, right? Like, you know, you should pay us so that we can protect you. Protect you from who? From us. Like, you know, it reminds me of that. Like, okay. Anyway, we're going to get right into
probably another witness.
The next witness, which is from the other big bad boy, MasterCard. And this is Linda Kirkpatrick. Here we go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sheedy. Ms. Kirkpatrick from MasterCard.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the committee. I'm Linda Kirkpatrick, and I'm the President of North America at MasterCard. It is my pleasure to appear before you this morning to discuss three things. First, the value that MasterCard brings to merchants, banks, consumers, and governments. Second, recent interchange adjustments. And third, the robust competitive environment in which we operate. Having worked at MasterCard for 25 years, I can personally attest to the value that we bring to our stakeholders. Our role is to enable commerce in a safe and secure way. For banks, we provide products that support their customer base, allowing them to deepen relationships and extend financial tools to consumers. For credit unions,
you know, one thing that, just real quick, it never ceases to amaze me how, like, joyous and wonderful they can make things sound, right? With the right speech. You're offering a payment solution. That's what it is. It's their bank account. You buy this, you pay for it, boom. It is not a relationship. It is not a host of
who help people buy homes and start businesses.
Yeah,
our products allow them to effectively support.
I use my MasterCard. I'm the kind of person who says just charge it, right? I go to look at that $1.2 million New York shack, because that's what you can get in New York for $1 million these days. And I just say, just put it on the MasterCard all the time. Yeah, help people buy homes. What the?
Communities. The value we bring to banks is evidenced by the greater than 45% growth in cards in the U.S. over the past 5 years. For merchants, electronic payments provide them with benefits and protections they don't receive from cash and check. In addition to increased sales and operational savings, merchants receive guaranteed payments, even when consumers don't pay their bills. Banks absorb these costs, which are on average higher than the average merchant cost of acceptance. MasterCard is deeply committed to small merchants. Within the first weeks of the pandemic, we announced a $250 million financial package to support them through this crisis.
I don't remember that.
The value we bring to merchants is clearly demonstrated by the growth in global locations where our products are accepted, which has nearly doubled over the last 5 years. This includes an incremental 24 million small businesses since 2020. And for consumers, MasterCard products provide access, convenience, and peace of mind. Consumers are never responsible for fraudulent activity that may occur on their accounts. Further, electronic payments kept commerce alive for consumers and small businesses during the pandemic. In fact, the U.S. government used our products to quickly deliver critical aid to vulnerable Americans. This value is clearly demonstrated by the spend on our products in the U.S., which has grown by nearly 60% over the past 5 years.
Did you get a stimmy?
To be clear,
What? You remember the stimmy checks, right? How everybody was dancing around about the stimmy checks?
Yeah.
I got a stimmy. I got my stimmy. So they can go buy a big screen TV or something else stupid instead of, food and rent.
banks, merchants, and consumers are all critical stakeholders for MasterCard. Their success is our success, which is why we work so hard to find balance in the system. In particular, I have personally spent many years supporting and partnering with merchants across their co-brand portfolios and other services. As part of balancing the interests of all stakeholder groups, MasterCard sets default.
I'm just going to interrupt you real quick because I don't think it would be possible for her to sound more out of touch with the people that they're dealing with here. I mean, she's talking about this whole host of we're secure and we're this, and we help people buy houses with their MasterCard. What? Yeah, I'll tell you who they help who they help to buy houses. The people who collect the fees. They get to buy a house.
Interchange rates are the fees charged by cardholder banks to merchant banks for the benefit of guaranteed payments, transaction processing, and account servicing. MasterCard does not earn revenue from interchange, nor do we set the fee charged directly to the merchants.
They keep saying that.
Yeah.
So who earns the money then, and who sets the fee? Because MasterCard and Visa are the ones that have consistently collected all the money and set all the fees.
Yeah.
Our rates seek to incentivize both card issuance by banks and card acceptance by merchants. Without these rates, more than 90 million merchants would need individual contracts with thousands of banks, which would be impractical. In 2020, we announced our intent to adjust rates to reflect current market conditions and investments. These adjustments represented the first significant changes in over a decade. After a 2-year delay resulting from the pandemic, we implemented changes to our default rates, which included some increases and some decreases, including for small merchants. Based on our modeling, the net impact of these and other recent changes is virtually neutral to the ecosystem. Finally,
you notice all these shyster talking mofos, right? It's always virtually neutral, virtually nil. Virtually does not mean the same as. People need to quit using that word incorrectly. All the time, you've seen it, right? You hear these people, oh yeah, it's virtually nothing. AKA it's something. There's something there. That's not what virtually means.
I'd like to note that the payment industry has never been more competitive than it is today. In addition to cash and check, we aggressively compete with several global and regional networks, and increasingly with buy now, pay later providers, person-to-person and account-to-account services, real-time payment platforms, digital currencies, wallet providers, and other forms of payment.
They're all worried about, oh my God, we have to compete now with other stuff. They've had a monopoly for so long that they don't know how to deal with it. And their solution, raise rates, because that's smart.
There is no.
For those of you just tuning in, by the way, I saw, you guys should know that Visa and MasterCard have collected a grand total of over $700 billion in fees since in the last 16 years. $750 billion. So when they tell you we don't get these fees, they're full of shit. Period.
No question that the variety of payment options available to consumers is robust. MasterCard does not hold or exercise market power. We embrace consumer choice and have embedded this concept into our business strategy. In summary, we are deeply committed to supporting all of our stakeholders, including merchants, banks, governments, and consumers. And we are extremely proud of the way our products enable financial inclusion and choice to consumers and small businesses to help them thrive.
Okay.
What choice?
Yeah. What choice?
Yeah, it's-
I went over a little bit, but so I'm just going to let her finish talking because
Okay.
it goes right into Charles Kemp from the Federal Consumer Program. This should be interesting.
I appreciate the committee's time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kirkpatrick. Mr. Mierzwinski, please.
Oh, sorry. Menzwinski is next. I'm sorry.
Thank you,
Menzwinski.
Senator Durbin. Chair Durbin, Senator Grassley, members of the committee, I am Ed Mierzwinski. I'm with the U.S. Public Interest Research Group. We're a nonprofit consumer advocacy organization and serve as the national office for the state PIRGs.
Okay.
All consumers pay more at the store and more at the pump because of non-negotiable, non-transparent fees that are set by the card networks, not by the banks themselves.
Right.
And I want to point out that when I testified in 2010, Chair Durbin, before your Appropriations Committee, that was on the matter that even the government couldn't negotiate the prices that it paid for buying and selling things on its government platforms. It's incredible to me that even the government is not big enough to hold Visa and MasterCard accountable.
Think about
But
that.
the
dude.
worst
Yeah,
problem
that's crazy.
occurs if you're a small merchant having
Yes.
to pay your probably second highest price of cost of goods sold might be higher, rent might be higher, but probably bank fees are the next price, or the next highest fee that you pay.
Yeah.
So what do you have to do? Because of the complicated rules that you discussed in your opening statement, Senator Durbin, the inches thick contracts, et cetera, they forbid the merchant from doing anything to lower the costs in his store. He's got no choice but to bake the price
Yeah.
of these overpriced swipe fees
Yeah.
into the costs that everybody pays, including the cash customers who might be
Yeah.
low income, and they're probably subsidizing. And despite what all the associations and the networks will say today, the bulk of the interchange fee goes to pay for affluent consumer rewards cards.
Yes.
It does not go to the other important issues of security. Those are small items compared to rewards. So
Okay.
So that's what all these rewards programs are for. And let's be honest, your average middle or lower middle class or lower class consumer who may have a debit card, you're not getting the cashback shit from that, dude. You're just not. You don't spend enough. The only ones who benefit from that are, like he said, the affluent ones, the rich people. Just like everything else, it's designed for the rich to get richer and the poor to get fucked. That's just how it is. It's unfortunate. It sucks, but it's reality. All right, our next little rant here. Okay, there it is. All right, is 3026 to 32. Sorry, 3553 to 40.046. I don't know, I messed up. But anyway, this is Commerce Bank shares, Charles Kemp.
It's 4046.
Okay, so 3553, which should be.
there's really nothing to restrain these networks in this market failure.
Wait a minute.
Sorry, I messed up. Okay, so sorry about that. I do make mistakes. It happens like, every 10 or 15 years. My wife would disagree, but because to her, I am perfect. Yeah, right. All right.
And then
To
it goes into the next
4006.
4046.
4046. Okay, that's where I
And then
messed
it goes
up.
right into the next person.
Okay, so this is Commerce Bank shares, Charles Kemp.
Ms. Winsky, Mr. Kim from Commerce Bank.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the committee. I'm pleased to testify before you today on behalf of Commerce Bank team members who serve communities up and down America's heartland.
Chucky.
Commerce is a mid-sized bank founded in Kansas City in 1865, We're honored to employ talented
That's an old
people
bank.
in almost every state represented on this committee. We offer a full suite of payment services, including debit and credit cards for consumers and businesses, and merchant card acceptance services that keep money moving in those communities we're privileged to serve, as well as all over the world, 7/24, wherever our customers are traveling or shopping, something that would be impossible without interchange in the networks. The views expressed in my testimony are broadly held among my colleagues at the thousands of mid-sized and community banks across the country. Just this week, letters have come to this committee signed by state banker associations, community banker associations, credit union leagues, and minority-owned banks, from small to large, from public to nonprofit mutual banks and cooperative credit unions owned by their depositors, urban, rural, and suburban. We're united in our view. Price controls in the form of interchange regulation like the Durbin Amendment harm consumers, harm small businesses, harm competition, and harm communities.
Okay.
So what is interchange, and is there a competition problem around it? Simply put, our payment system requires constant investment and protection, and we need a fair way to pay for it. I believe both banks and merchants should share in the cost of the payment system. Banks and credit unions invest billions into building and securing the payment system before, during, and after the sale. Merchants contribute to those costs by paying a small fee when they use the system to make a sale.
I'm going to pause it here real quick because he does bring up a good point, right? Who pays for the security, right? Who should pay for it? And the merchants do get a benefit. They get an opportunity to accept payments from people that otherwise they would not be able to. So in theory, should the merchants share some degree of cost because they're getting benefit from it? Yes, in theory. However, I think what we're seeing is that the vast majority of the vast majority of the responsibility of paying is falling on the merchants, thereby falling on the consumer.
That's interchange, and as a fee, it's just a convenient and proportional way to pay their share. When we compete for merchants' card business, it's
I like you hear that a lot.
You do.
Recently, pay your fair share. Pay your fair share. It's a communist thing, man.
extremely competitive. We're up against many players trying to give the merchant a slightly better deal. That used to mean just other banks selling a card terminal, but today there are many independent providers competing. I think the average merchant probably gets tired of hearing from people trying to sell merchant services, but cards aren't the only choices today. There's Venmo, PayPal, Square, Cash App, Clover, Toast, RTP, FedNow, Same Day ACH, Buy Now, Pay Later, new payment rails and merchant payment solutions at all price points, including free and some more costly than credit. A decade ago, my bank's executive chairman testified in the House and predicted that the Durbin Amendment would cause great harm to consumers and will affect banks of all sizes. Now the data's in and we can quantify the size of the harm and how the promises made about protecting community banks and lowering prices turned out to be empty. Many consumers have lost access to free checking, minimum balance and monthly fees are up, debit card rewards are scarcer or non-existent, and small merchants have seen their cost of accepting cards rise. These are findings of the federal banking regulators and respected academics. Per research from the Federal Reserve Board and Dr. Natasha Sarin, a University of Pennsylvania law professor who is now senior economic policy maker in the Biden Treasury Department, banks were 35 to 40% less likely to offer free checking accounts following the passage of the amendment. For the largest merchants, this law has been a windfall, and it's helped some get more market share, but for smaller businesses and financial institutions that can't tap into a law that encourages consolidation and scale, the costs have been steep. In fact, small banks and credit unions, which were prominently proclaimed as exempt from the price caps, we've seen their interchange revenue drop 30% per swipe on PIN debit transactions. This is a direct result of small issuers being covered by the law's backdoor price controls known as routing mandates. Merchants promised Congress they would reduce retail prices after the law passed, but the Fed found that nearly 99% of merchants did not pass on any savings to their customers. At the very least, this should make us skeptical about the current demands and the debit routing rules, and that debit routing rules should be expanded and extended to credit cards. Our nation needs to keep up when it comes to payments, technology, and security, and that won't happen if we cut the investment out of our own infrastructure. Countries like China and Russia are investing heavily in innovating their payment systems and will present a challenge to America's leadership in this key area of national and economic security. Yet policies like the Durbin Amendment create rigid rules and investment caps that limit our potential to do the same. The payments world is rapidly evolving, and smaller financial institutions are facing enormous costs to upgrade, offer new products, and just stay in the game. Interchange is an investment in American commerce, not a junk fee. I urge the committee to look at both sides of this story and put the consumer first. Thank you again for having me.
Okay. All right. So there is an argument to be made that, okay, this particular fee helps to pay for the security of the network and all of that, right? But again, 700 plus $1 billion over the last 16 years. Like, you better have quantum computing at this point for that much money. There's no way it costs that much.
No. The money's going somewhere else too.
Where does the money go? Follow the money, right? Okay. So we're going to go right into our next person is Doug Cantor, General Counsel for the National Association of Convenience Stores. Now, this should be interesting. This is also the guy, if you're just joining us, he apparently went to a small community college, but then graduated from Yale.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting. Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Mr. Cantor.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, members of the committee for having me here today and for having this hearing. We really appreciate the opportunity because we think this is an incredibly important issue. The credit card market is broken.
Yes.
Visa and MasterCard centrally set the fees that the banks that issue consumers cards charge. Those banks compete on every other price they set, every other interest rate they set, every other part of their business, but not here. They could do it here. There are very big institutions. This is an incredibly concentrated market with large institutions like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. None of them are setting their own prices. That doesn't make any sense. Then on top of that, Visa and MasterCard set the terms by which cards are accepted, which make sure to insulate those fees from any other competitive market pressure to make sure they can stay high. They have an honor all cards rule that says to merchants, if you want to take any single Visa or MasterCard, you must take every single one. And the prices on these cards can be incredibly different for these businesses.
Yes.
They can be factors of 2 or 3 times as high. By doing that and then restraining merchants' prices and the price signals that they can send to their consumers, they make sure there's no market pressures here. That's why we have a market failure. It doesn't have to be this way, and it shouldn't be this way. We need competition in this market.
I agree.
That's the bottom line. There's lots of discussion on this panel, and has been already this morning, about how many other forms of payment there are. This isn't about the other forms of payment. This is about credit cards, because thankfully we've had some reform of debit cards, which has been quite good.
Yeah.
But on credit cards, we have not. The interesting thing is, as folks on the panel talk about, well, there's buy now, pay later, and there's cryptocurrencies. There's all these other things. Yes, there are, but installment loans and other things are not credit cards. They're conflating these different markets. Senator Grassley this morning talked about the rise in prices in different markets, beef, chicken, other products. Nobody on this committee would think it acceptable if there was a price fixing scheme going on in the beef market that caused prices to be high, and someone else came in and said, well, don't worry, everyone can just eat chicken. It's okay. It's very competitive. That's not okay. We need to deal with the competition problem in credit cards to have a fair deal for merchants and consumers, and frankly, for the U.S. economy, because the $138 billion just last year that were charged in fees that consumers don't see.
$138 billion in fees just last year. This was
in 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's an insane amount of money. Now, remember, the person who was talking, I believe, for Visa touted the $9 billion that they spent to upgrade the security, right? I think it was $9 billion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. 170.
Yeah, where's the rest of the
Where's
money
the
go?
rest? Where's the rest of the money? All right, our next clip is
Durbin, probably, right?
it's Dick Durbin again. All right. 45-44 to 51-30.
It's his turn to do the question.
Yeah.
Have 5-minute rounds of questions, and I'll start. It turns out that the issue of inflation was addressed directly by the chief financial officer of Visa. I hope I pronounce his name correctly, Vasant Prabhu. On January 27th earnings call, he is asked how inflation impacts Visa. His answer, and I quote, net, I mean, we are a beneficiary of inflation. He also said, quote, to the extent that there's inflation driving up ticket size, clearly it's beneficial to us. So
yeah, the more people pay, the more they make.
Let's put to rest the theory that this has nothing to do with inflation. It appears to have some relevance. Can I ask you, Mr. Sheedy, incidentally, Ms. Corrett told us that coincidentally, April 22nd was chosen by both Visa and MasterCard as the day to raise the fees. Was that just a coincidence or coordination? Can you turn on your feet? Turn on your mic, please. Thank you.
Uh-oh.
Apologize. Senator, we did not raise the fees in April. In fact, 90% of businesses in the United States see a change in their rates that were down by 10% effective with the April changes.
Ms. Corrett, were you wrong?
No, we calculated, we got a 300-page amendment or a fee schedule. We calculated exactly the fee increases for us. And while some fees went down, others went up significantly. The net effect is our fees went up.
Both companies the same day?
Yes.
Mr. Sheedy, here's a customer who has some evidence otherwise.
Yeah.
May I ask you, Ms. Kirkpatrick, you're in charge of MasterCard North America. I want to ask you about these crazy Canadians. How in the world can you explain this? In Canada, there's a debit card system called Interac. It is the most widely used debit card system in Canada. It reports it has one of the lowest rates of fraud globally. The website for Interac says, and I quote, interchange for Interac debit is currently set at 0. How is it possible these crazy Canadians are getting no charge of interchange fees on debits and have less fraud? How can that possibly be?
Yeah, that's suspicious as hell, isn't it? When they just assured us that these billions and billions and billions of dollars that we're paying in interchange swipe fees are for security.
Well, Senator, it's not the case that Canadian merchants don't have interchange fees. There's value
in the debit cards.
There is value in the debit space that consumers derive from transacting at merchants, and there's value that the merchants
What do you mean by
receive.
You have to define terms.
When merchants shop at a Canadian, when consumers shop at Canadian merchants, they receive value through the form of guaranteed payment, lower risk, purchasing power. And so therefore, there are interchange fees on debit transactions in Canada, and it's a direct result of the value that those merchants are delivering and that consumers are deriving.
Mr. Brzezinski noted what's happening in Europe, so let's stick with the program for a minute. Try to explain to me the difference in debit and credit card interchange fees in Europe, where the European Union has set a standard of 0.2% and 0.3% respectively, 1/8 or 1/10 of which is charged in the United States. Clearly, their system is much different than ours, and we have no regulation. Other countries like Australia, Brazil, China, India, Israel, Malaysia, and South Korea also limit interchange fees. So what lessons can we learn from all of these countries who've decided that interchange fees are way too high in the United States?
Well, I think those countries know that the credit card system is a market failure, and the ways that the banks are forced to accept all of the fees from the networks and the consumers are forced to pay increased prices, they're not going to have it. They're not going to have it, and they said no. And U.S. Congress should strengthen the Durbin Amendment, expand it to credit cards, and lower interchange across the board.
Make sure I understand the scope of interchange fees. If I decided that I wanted to give money to Catholic Charities for the people, Ukrainian refugees in Poland, and I use my credit card or debit card to make that donation, would you be collecting an interchange fee on that transaction, Mr. Kirkpatrick?
The interchange fees for MasterCard does have interchange fees, or the banks do charge interchange fees to consumers.
I like how it would quickly
Yeah.
change from no, not us. They do. They charge. And the incessant, well, there's value there, so we charge for the value. That's going to be the talking point. You're getting value, so it's nobody is saying there shouldn't be any fees.
No.
Obviously, there's a cost to doing business.
Yeah.
But the exchange fees that are currently there are so exorbitant that they are making hand over fist on this stuff, man. What did they say? 170 billion, 130 billion dollars just last year.
Something like that.
2021.
118. I think it was 118.
Yeah, 118 billion dollars, over $100 billion definitively in 1 year in fees alone.
Rather to merchants across all transactions for the benefit that the consumers are receiving from that transaction. So there's a cost associated with servicing that transaction and servicing that account.
And the interchange fees also apply to sales tax I'm paying on my restaurant bill?
It does.
Why?
It's the total value that the consumers are deriving when they shop at a merchant.
A tax on a tax.
It's the total value. So you can't just look at interchange as one
More than a total value.
as one element. You're looking at the total cost of servicing that account, which includes fraud, guaranteed payment, increased purchasing power, and the ability to use that product anywhere MasterCard is accepted.
And we look at it across the world where interchange fees are regulated and restrained, and we don't see this rampant fraud. Senator Grassley?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think there's a place for the government to have regulations.
yeah,
Because-
so it gets into a much bigger question, right? So how much government intervention do we want?
Yeah.
As a conservative, I
Yeah.
want the government out of the vast majority of areas, as little government interference as possible. However, as we've seen with Visa, MasterCard, these fees, they've reached astronomical levels.
Yeah.
And so the government has no problem regulating plenty of other things. Why not here?
Yeah.
Why not here? All right, so we're going in next with Chuck Grassley from Iowa, 51-31 to 53-33. So a couple minutes from him.
Before my 5 minutes starts, I'd ask unanimous consent to add several letters from stakeholders into the record.
Without objection.
As of 2020, statistics show that Visa and MasterCard combined for 84% of all purpose, general purpose credit cards within the United States. Some have characterized this as a duopoly, able to extract above market payments for their services. So
And I don't care what anybody says, both Visa and MasterCard adjusting their rates on the exact same day, I smell collusion.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody an independent company doesn't just decide to change their rates and it happens to fall on the exact same day that your only other competitor changes their rates. Give me a break, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Sheedy and Ms. Kirkpatrick, what would be your response to these concerns? And do Visa and MasterCard abuse market power? And then I'd like to have Mr. Cantor and Mr. Corrett listen and then respond. Mr. Sheedy, you want to start out?
Yes, Senator, thank you. Senator, we operate in a highly competitive market. Merchants have never had more choice at the checkout. Consumers have never had more choices to be able to pay. And one of the things that I think is important to understand about our payments network
Crime here,
and the level
dude.
playing field that we set with interchange is The same interchange flows through our network and gets passed to, in the same exact manner, to thousands of financial institutions across the United States, small banks and small credit unions, to larger players. And they all compete with one another and innovate in that complex, very dynamic marketplace. And ultimately, the consumer wins from that competition. And when the consumer is empowered to transact with products that are tailored for them, and investments are made in the system to manage risk and keep the system secure with a high integrity, and that consumer is empowered to shop at the point of sale, the merchant benefits from that flow. So it's that balance that we're trying to accomplish. And any notion that we're not operating in a highly competitive market, we fundamentally disagree with.
Does your head hurt?
It does. It does. Look, these CEOs and these big money people, right? They try to continue to push this. Oh, it's highly competitive. It's highly competitive.
Mhm.
And on the one hand, that's technically true because you do have various payment methods beyond just credit cards and cash now, right? You know, you used to have cash, check, or charge. That was it. Now you've got debit cards. Now you've got, PayPal and these other like peer-to-peer payment services like Cash App and stuff like that. Some merchants choose to use them. Some merchants don't. But ultimately, like he said, Visa and MasterCard represent over 80% of the transactions happening. So don't give me that highly competitive marketplace crap. Like,
They don't want the gravy train to end.
That's exactly it. You guys have made so much freaking money from this stuff that you could pay to revolutionize the network over the next 20 freaking years, and you still made a profit. Give me that crap. All right. So our next clip is from Senator Mike Lee from Utah. And that is at the 10508. Sorry. Yeah, 10508 mark.
Mr. Sheedy, let's start with you. There are those who have argued that it's anti-competitive, cartel behavior for banks through the Visa and MasterCard networks to get together and collectively agree that they're all going to charge the same interchange fees to merchants. What's your response to that?
Senator, Visa sets the interchange fees, these default interchange fees that pass from merchants acquiring banks to issuing banks. We do that on our own. We don't do that with, we certainly do it with input from the marketplace. The impact that the pandemic has had on merchants has been really important to us. At the front end of the pandemic, we lowered rates for supermarkets, restaurants, and education merchants. More recently, 90% of the merchants in the system will receive a 10% reduction in the rates that they process. I'm
genuinely curious where they come up with that information, right? He's claiming that over 90% or 90% of businesses are going to see a 10% reduction with this rate hike. Like, how do you come up with that? What data is that based on? What businesses are you talking about? You can say that all day long. It doesn't make it true.
Yeah.
I know that small mom and pop shops over the last couple of years have steadily complained more and more and more about fees from, as a matter of fact, I was told by a small business owner that tapping your card costs them more than insert or swipe. I did not know that.
I did not know that
way
either.
to verify that, but that's what they claim. Also, all these cashback rewards and all this stuff, all that stuff is paid for by the merchants.
What's really important, I think I'd like to stress, is we are not raising rates. The average rate in our system for Visa credit has been flat since 2015.
No, I get that. And I've got a limited time. I just want to be clear what I'm asking. asking you to respond specifically
Nice way to dodge
the
the
charge
question, by the way.
that it amounts to cartel behavior to agree to charge the same interchange fees.
We disagree, Senator. The setting of a default interchange fee, we feel, is highly competitive in the ways in which it delivers the same interchange fee to thousands of financial institutions that then go into the marketplace on behalf of consumers and merchants and compete and innovate. So we feel that the model works very well in a system where you need tens of thousands of banks supporting millions of cardholders and millions of merchants. There's no way to operate the system other than setting a default interchange fee.
For there to be a network effect. In other words, you need the network effect in order for your system to work.
In order for there to be a coordination of activity where consumers can transact from a card that's issued by a credit union in Utah with a merchant in New York online or in person, you need to have a default interchange fee so that you know how the economic flows are going to work. And having that be the same interchange fee, irrespective of the size of the financial institution, promotes competition.
Mr. Kander, what's your response to that?
Yeah, my response is, one, they don't need to do that. I submitted with my testimony an article from NYU economist Nicholas Economides, who's pointed out that because of the concentration in the market, both on the issuing side and on the acquiring merchant side, that just 90 contracts would cover 72% of all the credit card volume. Those big banks could easily set their own prices. You don't need that going on. And there's been much more concentration since then. The other thing I would note is that having the same fees does not promote level playing field competition on the bank side either. John Blum from the Community Bankers testified previously before Congress in hearings that their costs per transaction, because they're a smaller institution, were much higher than the largest banks. But if you lock them into the same prices on higher costs, of course, they're not going to be able to compete in the same way. And those large banks have won over a lot of those small bank customers into the credit card market, which is why credit cards is so much more concentrated than debit cards as a result of that.
Mr. Kim, go with me, and if you want to respond to this, that's great too. But I was also going to ask you separately, what would happen to credit card rewards in a universe in which you imagine that there's suddenly an alternative network through which merchants could process transactions?
So the interchange pays for, I think, roughly 60% of interchange revenue goes out in the form of rewards. And I do believe it goes, not just to the wealthy. Everybody loves the rewards. I think it's a much more broadly distributed value that people of all socioeconomic classes find. And
You're full of shit, dude. I'm just going to say that you're full of it. If you use your card and you bought, $2,000 worth of your normal stuff during the month, right? And you get your little piddly 0.2% or whatever. Yeah, you got an extra $20 or whatever. I'm not doing the math on it. But ultimately, you cannot afford to spend enough to make big gains in cash back. Unless you're wealthy. It's just that simple. I can't afford to spend $50,000 a month on a credit card. No way. That's what we're talking about. And they purposefully obfuscate and dodge questions like this because they know they're wrong.
In debit, there were debit rewards before the laws changed, and those debit rewards largely went away because interchange helped subsidize those things. So you would see those rewards go away. And furthermore, you would see banks of my size and smaller and maybe even somewhat larger. The economics of issuing credit cards, it's not what it once was. There's lots of competition. It's harder to do. The big banks, it's interesting to come back to the last question.
I don't care how much competition there is for banks and how hard it is to navigate. All I know is we as consumers are paying ridiculous amounts of money to credit card companies.
Mm-hmm.
Visa, MasterCard, whatever bank issued it, they're all taking your money. It's just that simple.
yeah, maybe you could cover, maybe, I don't even know that I agree that the largest banks could negotiate with all the millions of merchants and set the interchange. But if they could, that would just put me out because I can't.
Mr. Chairman, I see my time's expired. I've got one follow-up question I want to ask on that. Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying the banks would still get paid for that transaction, but get paid less, and likely rewards programs would be a casualty of them. There might be something left of them, there might not.
Yeah, I would, depending on the rate, I assume we'd get paid, yeah.
Okay, so if that's the case, couldn't one argue that this is a manifestation of lack of competition and that the price is being artificially inflated by lack of competition? The consumer rewards provide a means of sharing in the monopoly, in the monopoly rents, you might say, in order to inflate demand and squeeze merchants. What's your response to that?
The purpose of rewards is not to squeeze merchants. The purpose of rewards is so that you have a value proposition that makes people want to use your card. And the competition, the reward space is an intensely competitive space. And again, it's hard for a bank my size to compete with the likes of Chase that strikes a deal with Southwest Airlines. Perhaps that continues. It wouldn't be as rich. But again, it kind of puts me out.
I mean, on the one hand, he does make a point, and that is that smaller banks compared to the giants don't have the bargaining power that the larger banks do.
Yeah.
That's a fair point. However, I would argue that all of these reward programs, the only purpose they're serving is jacking up the prices on everything. That's just how it is. We, the lower income people who purchase the everyday stuff all day, every day, are paying the fees that are going to these reward programs. The merchants are the ones paying the fees, but they have to raise the prices on their stuff in order to counter it. So next time you see somebody bragging about their rewards that they got, you paid for that. All right, our next clip, we go right into it, is Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware.
Yep. I think it's the last
Thanks, Mr.
clip.
Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Lee.
last
Senator
one.
Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to you and the ranking member for convening this conversation today. I am glad to see that on this panel we have represented the whole range of potential input, consumers, consumer advocates, networks, merchants, and a bank that is a credit card issuer. Clearly, I think we have to look at all of these four different sides of the credit card transaction universe when attempting to assess whether or not there's sufficient competition, what capping fees would do, and what the consequences might be. Mr. Kim, I'm glad you're able to testify today and provide a bank issuer's perspective. I've heard from credit unions, community banks, large banks in my state that are credit card issuers, and they depend on interchange fees in order to be able to support the credit cards that they offer to consumers. Credit unions and community banks in particular are concerned that a substantial decrease in interchange would mean they could no longer sustain card programs that extend credit to individuals who might otherwise not be able to access credit cards. So I think the issue here isn't just losing rewards programs, but losing access to credit and losing the ability of smaller issuers to participate and compete at rates that are lower than you might get from major cards.
Now, that's an interesting perspective, right? So he's claiming that certain banks and credit unions, not all, but certain banks and credit unions use the money that they get from the exchange fees rather than putting it into a rewards system. It's actually used to extend credit that they wouldn't otherwise be able to extend. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a subject that I believe kind of deserves its own little deep dive. Is that accurate? Is he telling the truth? I have no way of knowing, but if your business model relies on interchange fees in order to facilitate loans, feel like that might be a bad business model.
Might be like a house of cards. Then.
Yeah. That doesn't pass the smell test. There's something weird there. Anyway.
How do issuing banks rely on interchange to offer credit services? And what impact would it be if that revenue substantially declined for your bank?
Okay, I think you're on the nose there with your comments. So, interchange is one source of revenue. Interest and fees on the credit card are another source of revenue. If that, and one of the things that makes this making small loans is very expensive. That's why you don't see a lot of people doing it. That's why it moves online where the costs are lower. And so we've been pushed. A lot of banks have been pushed out of the business because the revenue stream's just not there. And in fact, the interchange used to make it a more profitable business, but in fact, now that we pay the rewards out to the consumers, it's squeezed that as well. So I think what you would see, so the very smallest of banks, they depend on larger banks like us to help them issue credit cards. So the margins there are even thinner. And I think you would just see that element of competition of issuing cards from the smallest institutions, from credit unions, from mid-sized banks. I think you'd see that just go away, and it would be the larger banks that have the scale that can still do business in a profitable way.
In one of the challenges, I've also heard from retailers in my state, family-owned grocery store, that their margins are so small that for them to pay an increase in interchange or swipe fees, this is where you sit depends on where you're listening to. On fraud and data breach, one of the concerns I've heard from a credit union in Dover, Delaware, is that covering the costs of reissuing cards, of investigating, of paying off the costs associated with a major data breach are not sustainable for a credit union or a small bank without interchange. Mr. Sheedy, is that something you've seen in your experience, Ms. Kirkpatrick?
I'll start. Senator, the situation with fraud and cyber risk and the risks associated with merchants and consumers transacting online is an enormous issue. A decade or so, we had a similar magnitude of risk at the point of sale with counterfeit cards that had been generated primarily on the part of data that had been breached by merchants and cyber criminals. We addressed that with rolling out chip cards and chip terminals. We have the same issue facing us now online. And there's roughly $10 billion of fraud annually online with merchants and consumers transacting in a way that generates fraud. And among the changes that we're making have made in April is to encourage the adoption of secure digital tokens that will authenticate the consumer and provide more guarantees and more assurance to the merchants so that we can address that fraud. It will require the merchants to do their part. We've invested $9 billion, as I've mentioned, in the last 5 years in fraud and security protections. Issuers are also investing. We have to make the same type of push to address this fraud online that we did in the physical point of sale with chip cards.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Cantor wants to address that.
Senator, if I could, actually, you raised some really important points, I think, in your earlier comments that I thought would be helpful, because we do have a track record around the world of some reforms, and we haven't found in other parts of the world the parade of problems that Mr. Kim and some of his brethren talk about. In other parts of the world, credit has still been available. Credit cards have still been used very frequently. And there's still rewards and all those sorts of things. And I also did just want to clarify that we as merchants, and Laura Corrett was clear about this in her testimony, we've not asked for a cap on credit card fees. This is a different market where we think there needs to be competition. Competition and market prices will help us here in ways that get at the types of problems you're worried about.
Could I ask a closing question, Mr. Chairman? I just would be interested, Mr. Merzwinski, Mr. Kim, Mr. Cantor, if you could just briefly speak to this question. Now that we have a decade of experience in what happened with capping fees for a debit, do we know whether the imposition of interchange fee caps led to lower prices for consumers and better access for lower income borrowers, consumers, in terms of low-cost banking services? Mr. Merzwinski, if I might, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I think that there are a lot of pressures on banks to lower the prices and to provide better services to lower income consumers. And a lot of that is being done through partnerships between banks and consumer advocates. And but on the issue of bank fees and the price of banking, I think the banks always look to figure out a way to blame the latest regulation.
Yeah.
And they love to blame the Durbin Amendment. I can't believe that the numbers are there to say that the Durbin Amendment has hurt lower income or all Americans. It's just, I don't see it.
There you go. So, yeah. Once again, we have these big banks, credit card companies saying, oh, if you somehow cap us, we can't possibly make any money. Bullshit. As they showed in Europe, they're doing just fine over there, even with caps, even with no fees on tax and all that stuff. We're double taxed. I mean, our forefathers are spinning in their graves with all the taxes and fees and government regulation. That said, we got to do something. We have to do something. So
And I think even as a conservative, I think there is a role for the government in this.
yeah, like I said, we can regulate everything else.
Uh-huh.
Why not this? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you spending your evening with us. And we'll see you again real soon. We've got actually several videos that are coming up over the next couple of days that I think you'll find fascinating. I know we enjoyed making them. So without further ado, God bless you, God bless Indiana, and God bless the United States of America. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you again real soon here on Dion's Daily Dose. Have a good night.
If you'd like to support the show, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Dion's Daily Dose. This has been Dion's Daily Dose, hosted by Dion Bergeron. Executive producers, Shawn Holgram and Michael Beebe. Copyright 2024. Dion's Daily Dose, all rights reserved.